Well, I mean, I guess we could probably just go ahead and get started. It's nice to see those who could make it today. For those who don't know me, I'm Lou Ann Wright, the Executive Director of Cardinal News, and welcome. I want to thank Dutchie and Dwayne for arranging this members-only Zoom. I went ahead and recorded it, and perhaps we'll figure out a way to send it out to other members who couldn't join us. I'm going to turn this over in a minute to Dwayne Yancey, who I think all of you know. And he's going to chat with Harry Wilson, who's agreed to come here and tell us how we can interpret or understand or not misunderstand political polling data. And Dwayne's going to talk with Harry and ask him some questions, but if you have some along the way, drop them in chat or, toward the end, you can come off mute and ask them yourselves if you feel comfortable doing so. All right, Dwayne, you want to take it away?
Okay. Well, I will let Harry run through all of his official credentials, but I've known him since um, Roanoke College started polling back in the dark ages when there was no internet. So that's how far back that goes. And of course, the Roanoke College poll is now, well, I would call it an institution. We've seen other universities in Virginia get into the polling business, but Roanoke College, I think, predates them all. Um, and we're in a season of polls. In fact, there's one that came out this morning from another school in Virginia. Um, and we all need to be good consumers of polls. So I thought that Harry Wilson would be a good person to talk to us about sort of what to look for when we see a poll. And yeah, whatever we need to know about how polls are conducted, but also just sort of a consumer advisory that not all polls are alike. So with that, all yours.
Okay, well, I will try to do the best I can. Polling has, I mean, as Dwayne said, polling has evolved tremendously in the more than 3 decades, I guess I've been doing this. Yeah, I mean, as Dwayne mentioned, when I took over then the Center for Community Research at Roanoke College, we were doing a once a year student knocking on doors poll in the Roanoke Valley, sponsored them by the Roanoke Times. And eventually we moved to that partnership kind of fell apart. And then at the college, we moved in a different direction, started doing telephone surveys. Took some early beatings, not that I hold grudges against anybody who ever said that, but took some early beatings unjustifiably for when we started out, and one time in particular when we were in advance of an election changing, and we got out there just by luck, by timing. We got out there before everybody else, but because we were the new kids on the block, there was some chatter that we didn't know what we were doing because what we had was different from what everybody else had. And eventually everybody had what we had, and it was nothing, we didn't do anything magical. It was right place, right time. But we've come a long way since then. And polling itself has changed a lot since then. I will confess that in some ways I'm catching up with all this. I was very long story, and I'll try to condense it, but I was in this position, as I said, for more than 3 decades. I retired, and the person who replaced me, or actually there were kind of people took different positions, different parts of my job. And one of them left, and I came back and started doing the press releases. And then the director of the poll, Dave Taylor, left in January, and they asked me to come back on an interim basis to come back and do this again. So I'm back doing this again after I was out of it for 3 years. And a lot changed in 3 years. In terms of how this gets done. That very few people, there are a couple of folks still in the Commonwealth who do all telephone polls. My hat's off to them because it's difficult, it's time consuming, and because of those two things, it's costly. Emphasis on the latter, it's very costly. Costs a lot more money to do these than it did when I started a long time ago. And obviously some of that's just inflation. Some of that is because we do things differently. What a lot of folks are doing now and what we are doing is a combination of telephone surveys, what we call text to web, which is people get a text sent to their phone and then they're asked to complete the survey online. And some interviews are drawn from a panel, proprietary panel. And you can contract with various companies who have lists of all these things, who have the panel, who do the text to web, who do all of this. And in fact, that's what we are doing now. In full transparency, we no longer make phone calls from Roanoke College. We have outsourced that to Siena University in New York. If nothing else, we have the good fortune, or I had the good fortune of making good friends with the folks at Siena a long time ago. And there is such a thing as rankings of polling organizations. Siena is #1 in the country. They're #1. So in that regard, I think we're doing okay. And before we did this for a decade, I shamelessly copied everything Siena did. I became friends with their director and he would say, Harry, I think you ought to do A, B, or C. And I said something like, Don, that sounds like a great idea. I think I'll do it. If I can afford to do it, I think I'll do it. So a lot of what we do really is in that regard what Siena did, and to some extent what Siena told me to do. I was also really blessed to get for about 15 years the person I've just replaced, Dave Taylor, who I'm sorry, I should have said I'm trained as a political scientist. Dave is mathematician, statistician, and Dave handled almost all of that for me. And actually, when I came back and took this over again, even after Dave left to college, he and I are friends. I ran into a snafu at one point in time. I had to call him. It's like, Dave, I need help. And God love him, Dave came over to my house and we sat down with my 2 screens right here in my little office in the house and figured some stuff out. But I was spoiled in the sense that he did that for me for a long time. But he left me templates, so I'm smart enough to be able to, most of the time I'm smart enough to fill in the numbers on the templates. And I'm smart enough to figure out at one point something didn't work right. And I was transcribing numbers and looked at it and it's like, no, that does not make sense. That's not right. Something is off here. So, but as I say, polling is now done in a lot of different ways. A lot of folks are going to this hybrid model where it is some phone calls. Most of those now, not surprisingly, go to cell phones because landlines are, I don't know, almost like rotary phones now, right? That, if you have a landline, you might as well have a rotary phone and really date yourself. Even I no longer have a landline, and 15 years ago, I was saying cell phones were the bane of my existence, which they were, and by the way, still remain. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And that's kind of what I had to do. So most of the phone calls we make now are on cell phones. Some other things I'll just hit quickly, and then I'm happy to take questions. If you're looking at how someone's doing a poll, you really need to look at their methodology and have some idea of what they're doing. People do things in different ways. one of the things that we do, and I'm really proud of what we do and got us involved in this, something with the National Polling Organization, AAPOR, American Association for Public Opinion Research. They have organization within the organization called the Transparency Initiative, which does not, I think this is fantastic. It does not prescribe how you do anything. You can do whatever it is you want to do. The only thing that is enforced is you've got to be painstakingly specific about what you are doing. And I would put the emphasis there. I think we're about to be reviewed by them. Every other year you get reviewed, and you always get dinged for something that you haven't done. So I put the emphasis on the word painstaking, that you really have to describe what you're doing. But nobody tells you you're doing this wrong. It's simply a question of, well, you need to explain to us what you're doing. And then does your methodology statement adequately explain to the reader what you are doing? And we try to do that. But with changing methods and things like that, even that becomes difficult. One more thing I will hit on that is a problem for all of this, and we're seeing this now also playing out in some ways related to survey methodology, but with the Bureau of Labor Statistics and employment statistics, where we've seen, I'll have to do one of these things, right? We've seen those numbers be revised in amazing ways 2 or 3 months after the fact. And they're having the same problems all of us are having, which is people don't answer surveys anymore. Response rates are poor. And that's true for almost everyone. I don't know who would be the exception, honestly. I really don't know who would be the exception. Response rates are terrible, which also adds, not surprisingly, to cost, because you got to contact a lot more people to get the same number of responses. How do we try to fix that? The response rates, you really can't, since there's no way we can make people take our surveys. But what we do is, at the end of all this, surveys get statistically weighted. And we can match the demographics in our survey, which never perfectly match the demographics either of Commonwealth for what we're doing, or registered voters or likely voters or whatever. It's never going to match exactly, right? We oversample old people, older people.
Yeah.
So I'm an old person now, I have to qualify that, I guess. But we oversample older folks because they're more likely to do surveys. We undersample young people. We undersample minorities, particularly young minorities, because again, no bias on the part of anyone. Simply, this is a demographic that you just can't get to do surveys. It's really tough. It's really tough. So, we make up for this with statistical weighting. And we hope that those people that do answer the survey accurately represent the people who don't. As long as they do represent the people who don't, honestly, it doesn't matter if your response rate is 1%. If they adequately represent everybody else. If they don't adequately represent everybody else, you got a problem. And that's just being honest. There's no other way to look at it. We don't seem to be, it doesn't seem to be that it's problematic, but it's not, we're certainly not at the point where it's catastrophic by any stretch. And the last point I would make is the vast majority, the people that I know in the polling business, and I don't pretend to know everybody or even a lot of people, but the people that I know want to get this right. We want to be accurate. When people ask me, like before an election, who do you want to win? My response is always whoever our poll said was going to win. That's who I want to win, right? I want to be correct. That's what I want. And I can tell you at the Roanoke College poll, we work hard at that. I know that sounds self-serving, and it probably is self-serving, but we really do work hard at that. Doesn't mean we're always right. Doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. Doesn't mean I haven't written crappy questions. Doesn't mean I've never made a mistake, anything like that. But we work hard to get it right. And everybody that I know does that as well. The folks I know the most are the folks at Siena, and they do a lot of work now with the New York Times, which somebody would say, oh, well, that puts them in league, whatever, with the New York Times. Like, yeah, because the New York Times is paying them, and I understand that, and I get that, but I know these folks, and these folks are trying to get it right. That's all they're trying to do. And the truth is, the pollsters who work for CNN, the pollsters who work for Fox News are trying to get it right. They're not trying to get it right for their editorial side. They're trying to get it right because they're professionals, because they have some self-respect. And, our reputation is on this. I understand every time I release a poll, my name is on that, or Dr. Cousins, who does our consumer sentiment, one of our names is on it. So, but it's my reputation, it's her reputation, it's also the college's reputation that's on the line with all this. And I take that very seriously. I know she does. And the folks I know in the business take that seriously too, right?
Harry, do you mind if I ask a question?
I don't know, sure.
So what I wanted to get to, and you touched on it, but it gets to methodology, which is the whole, which is really key here. And that is, you mentioned Siena being #1 in polling. First of all, who grades them? Is that the AAPOR? Second of all, tell us the things that a polling organization is graded on so that we understand why it matters, the credibility factor. Why is Siena #1? What do they do right?
I think that's a good question. I think Real Clear Politics does a ranking there, 538.com, or Nate Silver does a ranking. Most of that is based on, and I'm not a huge fan of this completely myself, but most of that is honestly based on how accurate you are in terms of, if I said candidate A is going to win by 5% and candidate B wins by 3%, well, I'm off by 8% there. If candidate A wins by 4%, I'm only off by 1. So a lot of what they do is they look at, generally, I think it's your most recent poll. They don't look at things 3 or 6 months in advance, because nobody should be held to that standard, because that's just impossible. Things can change so much. But they look at your most recent poll. You do get points for being in the Transparency Initiative. AAPOR does not do a ranking. I don't think anybody does that. And I don't know who besides pollsters look at the rankings, right? The last one I saw, by the way, Roanoke College, was number 18. I was pretty happy about that. We were in the top 20. Like, I'll take that. We're pretty small and whatever. So it's like, hey, I was pretty pleased out of like 100 and some polling organizations. So I was like, okay, thumbs up. We're doing okay. So that's who does that, and that's kind of what people. That's really, to a large extent, what people look at. So also, when you're looking at polls, I should also mention margin of error, which you hear about all the time, which is based on the number of interviews you've completed. Primarily, it's based on that. The size of the population, which is a really small part of that calculation. And also, when you do statistical weighting, that changes your sample size and increases your margin of error. So anytime you do statistical weighting, it increases the margin of error. And if you've got people who are counting an awful lot, then that really can mess with your margin of error, right? So what happens there with the weighting is, honestly, people don't like to hear this, but some people count for less than 1, and some people count for more than 1, right? If you're if you're a 65 or older white female, sorry to tell you, but you're always going to count for less than one. If you're a 65 or older white male, you're going to count for less than one, but more than the females do. If you happen to be a young Black male, you're going to count for probably 2 or 3, maybe even, unfortunately, maybe even 4. You're going to count a whole lot more because we just don't have a lot of your demographic. And that's kind of, that's how that works out.
Mary, may I ask a question about, I hear what you're saying about the response to surveys is down, because it seems like everyone is always sending you a survey or trying to hit you up for a survey. And you've talked a lot about still like using the phone, texting, right? Or whatever. What other ways are you trying to reach different demographics? Are there other platforms? And, because there's so much, you may find these different demographics using different type of social platforms that you could that you might be interacting with. And there may be advantages and disadvantages to doing that. And I'm just wondering what the direction will be to try and increase survey response or increase the number of different types of people you can reach.
I think from my perspective, the response rate is just almost an intractable problem. It's been going down since I started doing this. It's been decreasing, and there really is no way to increase it. And there are lots of reasons for that. Some of what you mentioned is that we're bothered with surveys all the time. And by the way, have you all ranked your most recent Amazon purchase? I'm just asking for a friend, right? Since every time I buy something on Amazon, I'm asked to do the survey and rank this. And last time you saw your doctor, did you complete that survey too? And have you ranked your phone provider and ISP and whoever else? So, I mean, I understand this because I don't do all these either. I do, when I get an actual public opinion survey, I do it. But I don't always, the joke used to be when we had a landline, my wife would answer the phone, and my wife does not do surveys. And she would just hand it to me and she would just say, here, it's for you. Because she knew I would do it. But that's pretty much, it's just really difficult. I honestly don't know the people who put their panels together. I don't know how they put their panels together, but they are able to recruit people from different demographics. I mean, for example, I've gotten several invitations from the Harris poll, which is now all online, to join their panel, which I have not done, and probably would be disqualified anyway because I'm a pollster. But I don't know exactly how they put their panels together, but they are able to pull people from different demographic groups. But how they get those to sign up, I don't know. They could recruit those. I honestly don't know how they recruit them. So they maybe recruit them in other places. From my perspective, once you get into any sort of social media to try to do any of this, you're on really, really thin ice on that.
Happy to. You're happy dog.
Well, Harry is being kind because I'm still doing penance for my coverage at the Roanoke Times of that 1994 Senate race poll where Roanoke College was the first in the state to put Chuck Robb ahead.
Not that I remember that, Dwayne, but yeah, not that I remember.
And the famous Larry Sabato, I remember, I forget his exact quote, but he was he basically didn't believe it, but it turned out to be right.
I kind of remember that too, I think.
There was a late wave for Rob, and Roanoke College was the first to catch that wave. That said, how do you account for changes in turnout over the year? 4 years ago, for instance, there was a big turnout, relatively speaking, among rural voters in Virginia. They voted Republican. That helped Youngkin. It's a very lumpy turnout, kind of like mashed potatoes. They're not all consistent, and they change from year to year. How do you account for that?
Really good question. And boy, if you figure out a great way to do it, please let me know. I would love to know what we do. And this is not perfect. But what we do is we wait to match the most recent relevant exit poll in terms of demographics, not in terms of who they voted for, but in terms of demographics. We do that. So the poll that we just released on the Virginia election last month, we weighted that to match the 2021 exit poll. Last year in the presidential, we weighted to match the 2020 exit poll, right? Is this perfect? No, absolutely not. It is not perfect, but I don't know a better way of doing it. I can explain what some other people do, but I honestly don't know a better way of doing it. And I learned my lesson. President Obama taught me a lesson in 2012 on that, because back in 2012, I can remember when I got it right and I can remember when I got it wrong. 2012, being the smart guy that I am, I said, there is no way he's going to put together that coalition again from 2008. It's just not going to happen. And I have lots of reasons, lots of very logical reasons to go with that. And I decided I was going to tweak the exit poll from 2008, not much, but just a little bit here and there. And you know what? I was just plain wrong. And the lesson I learned from that was I'm not that smart. I'm not that smart. And easy for me to sit here right now and say, you know, Republicans in 2025 in Virginia are not going to turn out like they did in 2021. It would be really easy for me to say that. In fact, I think I just said it. But do I know that? No, I do not. And am I going to substitute my judgment for that for the exit poll? No, I am not, because I did it once, got burned, and learned my lesson. What some other people do is they will ask which we ask also, how likely are you to vote? And they're like, no, one of the things, at least Siena used to do it this way. They would include everyone. If someone tells us at the end, like at the survey most closest to the election, no, I'm not very likely to vote, we just kick them out because odds are they're not going to vote. Okay. Siena will keep them in, but they do another statistical weight, and those folks count for like nothing, almost nothing, but they keep them in their sample. And somehow they have an algorithm that seems to account for that. So that's one way of doing it. You can also include people's previous voting habits, which you can get when we get the registered voter list. Obviously, we do not get who you voted for, but we can obtain a record of this person votes in every election. This person only votes in presidentials. This person seems to vote only in statewide or whatever. We get that information. We don't do, at Roanoke College, we don't do anything with that. I don't do anything with that, but I do know other people do things with that also, and we'll include that information somehow in a very complex algorithm, which statistically is beyond my capabilities, but I could find somebody to do it, but statistically beyond my capabilities. To do that, to try to account for all of that. And then you can try to ask the enthusiasm question too. How enthusiastic are you? How likely are you to vote? How enthusiastic are you to vote? We can look at people's previous voting behavior. We can do that. I find it honestly just as simple and probably as accurate to just go with the exit poll, knowing that may be flawed. And, you know, again, I can think it is, but, you know, I don't know that. You know, I just don't. And anyone who says to you, like, oh yeah, turnout in 2025 is going to be this, they're guessing. Maybe an educated guess, but they're guessing. They don't, no one knows. You know, talk to me after we get the exit poll results in a couple days after the election, and then I'll be able to tell you. But other than that, it's not throwing darts at a dartboard, but it's an estimation.
Mhm.
You know, as all polling is, it's an estimation, and it's not that precise.
So Harry, I want to ask you something then, knowing now, because Luann touched on, response rates, which is a question that I was going to get to as well. And with everything, with how everything has changed in terms of media and platforms and people, with the way people do or don't respond, and make the case for why we even do it anymore, particularly political polling. Make the case for why it's even credible enough to be useful, besides useful for, the pollsters themselves, or students learning in this process, or, and this is a big one, providing content for media, right? For them to report on, so they have something to report. Can you tell me what your thoughts are on that? And I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I'm just curious.
I think the answer to that really depends on your perspective and what you're getting out of it. For me personally, I would say a couple of things. People remember, most people, so I'm making the mistake in generalizing when I shouldn't. Many people remember when we get it wrong. Many of those folks don't remember when we get it right. And most of the time, most reputable pollsters kind of get it right. You know, when I say get it right, I mean within our margin of error. I'm not saying that every election we're going to get like 50.5% to 49.5%, and we're going to hit that nail on the head. That's not going to happen, right? But most of the time, polling is pretty close. I think where polling has the most value for myself, honestly, is on the issue questions, not on the horse race questions. I mean, I know you're recording this, so I have to slap myself here first, but we all do the election questions partially because we're interested in it and partially because you guys are interested in it. And that's what gets reported, and that's what gets our name out there. Sorry if I'm not supposed to be that honest about that, but that's what it is. And when I get questions, we've got a poll 6 months before the election, and I kind of know, I know when I see the results what's going to play and what's not going to play. I do have that bachelor's degree in journalism way back when. So I know what's going to play and what's not going to play and what's going to be in the lead tomorrow. So I can largely figure that out. And it's always going to be the horse race question. And I always tell every reporter I talk to 6 months in advance, I just say, this is 6 months in advance, right? The average person is not even paying attention to this yet. The average person is, I don't know, living their life, which does not revolve around politics, right? Their life revolves around work, their family, their friends, maybe having fun, things like that. Not always revolving around politics, but that's sort of what gets the attention. But I mean, I think we do it honestly, and I think there is something, I think there is some value to see how an election is going. It does not, we've never seen any evidence that polls actually impact elections, and people have done studies on this. Whether some people say, well, so-and-so is so far ahead that their supporters won't turn out, or the other person's so far behind that their people aren't going to turn out. We don't really see any evidence of that. Can I say it never happens? Of course not. But statistically speaking, it doesn't really seem to make much of a difference. People go out and vote for a variety of other reasons, right? And I don't think any individual actually votes because they believe their individual vote is going to determine the outcome of that election, right? I don't know anybody that thinks that, right? If we vote for other reasons, right? Want to have our voice heard or whatever, but not that my single vote is going to determine who wins or who is not the next president of the United States, right? It's not the way it works.
I'm always surprised, given all of the challenges in polling that you've talked about, people not answering surveys, all the rest, how accurate some of them are. I mean, going back to look at the presidential race last year, I mean, there were a whole bunch of pollsters who, they were almost dead on.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, the answer to that is because we work hard at it, because we try to find these other ways, because we figured out that phone surveys by themselves don't work anymore. So now we're doing text. So now we're doing these other things, and we're recruiting from these panels. And yeah, and when polls have gotten it wrong, even like 2016, they were not dramatic. They were wrong, but they were not dramatically wrong. And what happened there was I would say we systematically underestimated turnout among lower education level voters. There was an explanation for what happened. They voted in larger numbers than they typically do. And when you get somebody that's way out of line in that regard, and they vote in a particular way, it's going to make a difference, right? I mean, when I'm doing, just give me an example. I mean, when I'm and this is changing slightly as Blacks are not quite as monolithic as they used to be in terms of voting for Democrats. A change of the statistical weights. If in Virginia, if Blacks are 18% of the electorate versus 20% of the electorate, if 95% of them are voting for the Democratic candidate, that makes a 2% difference in your poll, right? But that also makes a 2% difference in the outcome of the election. And if we get that number wrong in that sense, we're off by 2%, then like we just handicapped ourselves by 2%. But you really don't know that in advance. And I was reading some stuff this morning even about, well, how is the Charlie Kirk shooting going to impact 2026 and turnout in 2026? It's like, who knows? That's a year from now. Does this invigorate particularly young Republican conservative voters? A year in advance, I don't know. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe this is all faded into the background then. So who knows? But yeah, you're right that most of the time pollsters do get it right. And it's kind of like, maybe, I don't know if I wanted to compare us to meteorologists or not, or if that would be an insult to meteorologists or an insult to us. But we all remember when the weather person gets it wrong, right? And like the last couple of days, they said there were going to be showers here. Like, we didn't have any showers in my house. I didn't see any. So it's like, oh, well, they never know what they're talking about. They don't know. It's like, but other times, 10 days in advance, they can tell me next Sunday there's a cold front coming through and the temperature is going to drop 20 degrees. And it does.
Mhm.
And I see that sometimes, and I'm like, how did you know that 10 days in advance? Right? You can see this is coming through, but how did you know it was going to take 10 days to get here? Not 9 days or not 11 days or 12 days or whatever. Right? And it's like, sometimes I think I'm pretty impressed with these folks. Like, they really know what they're doing. And then other times, like everybody else, it's like, oh, yeah, they said 10 inches of snow and we didn't even get 2 flakes of snow.
Yeah.
Like, so.
Hey, Harry, I've got a really good question from one of our members here, Mary. When looking at a poll or a poll's methodology, what are some red flags that indicate a poll is not reliable? Thank you for that, Mary. What do you say, Harry?
First of all, if you can't find their methodology, that's a red flag. If you really want to get down into the nitty-gritty, you can also look at their questions, how they word their questions, although for elections, it's pretty standard. If the election were held today and you had to decide right now, would you vote for so-and-so, the Republican, or so-and-so, the Democrat? And by the way, half of that gets reversed. So half the people are asked so-and-so the Republican first, half the people are asked so-and-so the Democrat first. So that gets flipped. Those things always get rotated. If you have more than two people, they all get rotated through there so that there's not a primacy bias that we call it. So that stuff gets rotated. And those things are pretty standard. But you can look at that, look at their methodology, look at their questions, look at how they did it. If you know the reputation of the poll again, that really does help. And going back to those sort of rankings, and I can't remember now. I think it was Real Clear Politics, right? I looked this up and we were number 18. Anybody can look this up. Not because we do it this way, but they not only rank you like how close you are on that, but if you skew in a Democratic direction or a Republican direction. And Roanoke College poll skewed Democratic by, I think it was like 1.5%. Right? Why? I don't know. Nothing that we do or nothing that I do. I'm not sitting there saying, gee, how can I make this 1.5% more Democratic than what it is? I can assure you I'm never doing that. Or Republicans, whatever. But some polls do skew in one direction or the other more than that. And you can find out if you find those rankings. You can find that, and we do. I mean, there's no denying it. We do tend to skew more Democratic. Doesn't mean all the time. Doesn't mean every election, but that's the case. And I'm not sure why, because when we're waiting to exit polls, that's a pretty objective standard. That's not something we just made up on the fly. So just another reason why we do that. But if you can look at those things, and again, the reputation of the poll, in some ways, honestly, the name of the poll nationally, I'm a big fan of the Pew Center. I'm a really, really big fan of the Pew Center and the polling work that they do. Part of that is because one of my graduate school mentors was their director of polling for about 20 years. So I know this guy personally. I know him well. I was actually lucky enough to co-author a piece of research with him. And that makes a big difference to me because I know this guy and I know how he operates. And if he says like, this is the way it is, I'm like, okay, Scott, this is the way it is. I'm with you all the way. So if you know something like that, again, Siena, New York Times, whether you like or dislike the New York Times, Siena, now Siena University, New York Times, their polling is top rate, top notch. It simply is. It doesn't mean they're always right either, but they're really good at what they do and they work really hard at it. I've interacted in the past with folks from the Washington Post, their polling group, again, whether you like or dislike the Washington Post, their polling operation is separate from editorial side. And I think they do good work. The folks, as I said earlier, honestly, at CNN and Fox News, you would think like, well, oh yeah, they're skewing it one way or another, but that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to get it right. They are really trying to get it right. So most of the national organizations, I think in that regard, are really pretty trustworthy. If you see a name that you've never seen before, then you might want to look them up. Occasionally I see names that I haven't seen before. And sometimes I get inquiries from folks that I'm not completely familiar with. After we released our last poll, I got an inquiry from the president of a polling organization. I was familiar with the polling organization, but I was very surprised that I got an inquiry from him wanting to see some of our crosstabs.
We have a question here from Bug Okie. Please describe the differences between internal polling and polling by Roanoke College, UVA, Wasson, and so on, and other types of polls. Maybe better ask, what might the party or a campaign be asking in an internal poll that you don't in a poll the college may conduct?
My guess here, because I don't have access to internal polling, but my guess here is honestly, they're probably not asking things very different from what we are asking. What I suspect they are doing is they are contacting a lot more people than we are, because they have a lot more of the one thing that makes this all go around that we don't have, which is money. So they can afford to do this. You know, if somebody gave me, I'd love to have an internal poll budget. That would be really cool. I could do really, really good stuff with that, I'd like to think. And I suspect that's probably the primary difference. I mean, honestly, I would be doing all phone surveys, but that's partially because I'm old school. So I'm still kind of tied to this old school methodology. And partly because I think it's a pretty reliable way of doing it. And I would be making a ton of phone calls. So you get that margin of error lower, right? And the one thing I will say too, if you can get access to internal polling should be the most accurate that there is, because any candidate, unless you're just really not very smart, needs the best information they can get, not just information that strokes my ego and says, oh yeah, everybody loves you. You know, everybody loves you, Harry. They think you're the best and you're going to get 80% of the vote. That's not what I need to hear. I mean, what I need to hear is people like this, but they don't like that about you. So they'd be asking they might be asking more detailed questions about what do you like or not like about a particular candidate. They might be asking those sorts of things, but they're also asking issue related questions and which candidate you favor on this issue, which we do sometimes. Actually, we did some of that in our last poll. So they might be doing more issue related questions and more questions about how you feel about candidate. But I suspect the biggest difference is probably the number of people that they're interviewing, because they should be interviewing a lot more than we are. And that's a function of resources.
And I can answer part of that because I recently sat in on a briefing by a Republican pollster who talked about the differences between internal polls that a party would do or a campaign would do and college polls. And she said the thing they were sort of least interested in was the horse race. That what they were most interested in were finding issues that would move groups of voters. So there were lots of questions, and I'm obviously making this up, but yeah, if we told you that, this candidate was opposed to unicorn farming, would that make you more or less likely to vote for this candidate? So they're doing a lot of sort of testing there to find issues that will help them. And yeah, they want to know who's ahead and who's behind, but they either want to keep that the way it is or they want to change it. So
yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Because yeah, that's kind of the stuff that you want to know within the campaign. You need to know. And they'd be doing some of that through focus groups too. If they're running a lot of focus groups, then they'd be doing that also to test their message. But yeah, and unfortunately for us, we see if we're unlucky enough to see campaign ads on television, and who is not that unlucky, then we kind of see the results of those internal polls, right, Dwayne? That
yeah,
this is where it gets played out. Yeah, it's like, well, if I told you this person did A, B, or C, would you be less likely to vote for them or more likely? Well, then, yeah, we're going to tell you this person did A, B, and C.
and a question from Naomi. I read recently the Gallup said their response rate was about 6%. Is that in the ballpark of what you're seeing?
That's about where we are. somewhere in that neighborhood. It depends. It's going to sound silly, but it's true. It depends on exactly how you calculate the response rate. If it's not just someone says no and someone refuses to do it, but if you continually call or you text someone and you know this is a working number and they don't respond, some people don't count that against you. Most people, and again, there is for AAPOR, there are approved ways of calculating response rates. And the answer is yes, somewhere around 6%. Some are lower, some are slightly better. You know, back in the golden years, 15 years ago, we were probably in the Roanoke College poll, we were probably in the 10 to 12% range, and we're lower than that now. Yeah. Honestly, I shouldn't say this, but honestly, I don't even calculate one, and I don't get one from Sienna when they're doing their stuff now, because I kind of know that's where it is. I mean, it's a good question, but that's kind of where it is. I don't know. The follow-up question that I'll ask is, how low can you go before this really becomes a problem? I don't have a good answer for that. It's problematic now, as I've said a couple times. I mean, it's problematic, and it makes it more costly to try to get accurate results. Makes it more difficult, makes it more costly. But how low can we go? I don't know. And again, if you run into situations where lots of people aren't answering the question, and those folks have a lot of influence for whatever reason, again, circle back to what I talked about earlier, Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I don't know enough about their full methodology, but I don't know that they're doing anything fundamentally wrong. But even what they have said is, we're doing what we've been doing for the past whatever number of years, and it's no longer working. In which case, I would say, okay, that means you got to do something different, because you're telling us what you're doing isn't working. So you need to find, I don't know what that way is. And I'm not taking sides on whatever here, but I'm just saying, if you're doing something and consistently, it's not working, you've got to try to find another way to do what it is you're trying to do.
Another question from Naomi. Given how much young people are on social media, is there any way to get information of any value from a voluntary response social media poll?
No.
Okay.
It's an easy answer to that one. No. Polls we don't see this anymore. I haven't seen this in a long, long time. But different organizations used to see this on, so I'm working with print media here, I'm kind of okay. Used to see this with television stations, and I didn't see this just in the Roanoke market, but I've seen this in other places too, where they used to do a, listener, watcher, whatever, call in poll. No, those are beyond useless. They're just misleading. Occasionally they could be correct, right? Because, the broken clock is correct twice a day. But no, methodologically, that's anything that's sort of in that regard is voluntary, even though you can refuse a survey, but anything that's sort of purely voluntary, that's, people look at that askance. But you're absolutely correct with younger people being on social media, and it's tougher to get younger people to do this. And at some point, maybe somebody will devise a way, I don't know, maybe they are now recruiting panels or something from social media. That would probably be okay. But you'd still then, what they do when they recruit the panels is they have, I'm making up numbers here, they've got 100,000 people in their panel, and they pick 1,000 out of that this time to do this survey. So they're not contacting everyone that's in their panel. So they're just kind of contacting a small subset of that.
All right, we're coming up on an hour here. Are there any more questions? Otherwise, we'll give Harry a closing statement, if you will.
Harry, I have one quick question for you.
Sure.
Don Norton of Arlington. Dwayne incorrectly introduced me as from the District of Columbia. That's only my day job. I'm a Virginian. So when Dwayne and I were young, the conventional wisdom was in general elections, bigger turnout helps Democrats, and in special elections, limited turnout would tend to help Republicans. In recent years, it's been said by pollsters and others that that's not true anymore. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. In fact, up here last week in Northern Virginia, we had a special election for a U.S. House seat that was vacant. Um, Normally, the Democratic vote in that district would be in the 60s. It's a Democratic district. This is Northern Virginia. However, the Democrat won 75-25. It was a one candidate, only one race special election. Now, is that because Trump is unpopular up here, or because it was a special election and it's in that district tends to be more highly educated people, etc. So the Democrat will always do better in a special election. How do you read this, Harry?
I would put on sort of my pollster and political science hat on this one and say that is, I mean, you're correct that things and now being older, I've learned that things in politics we just go through cycles. But yes, it used to be that the conventional wisdom, and I think the conventional wisdom was accurate. Democrats did better in higher turnout elections. Republicans did better in low turnout elections. And that's because Republican voters past tense, tended to skew higher education, generally speaking. And higher education voters are generally speaking more reliable. I'm going to say more reliable in terms of more likely to turn out in more elections. The education is now a major, and it's flipped, is a major determinant of partisanship today. Right? When I used to teach this in my political science classes, I would talk about race and gender. Right? It was really pretty simple. Race and gender. Black skewed Democratic, which is still true, but not as much as before. And female skewed Democratic, male skewed Republican, still true, and maybe about as true as before, not sure. But the one thing that has really changed in the past decade, 15 years, has been education. That lower education, which means those lower turnout voters, are now Republicans, and higher education is now Democrat. So if you're talking about an election like a presidential election, the big question for next year, for example, is can Republicans match Trump's turnout, because Trump voters tend to skew lower education, right? Can Republicans, when Trump is not on the ballot, will they come out and vote for Republicans? Or are they not going to come out and vote because Trump's not on the ballot and they're really just Trump voters? And that's not just because they're Trump voters, it's largely because of educational levels. That's the question to which, by the way, at this point, no one has an answer. But that's the probably important question for 2026. But I do think now Republicans do better in higher turnout elections. And if Republicans also start taking advantage of early voting, mail voting, all that, which I know Trump and others have been opposed to for a long, long time, if Republicans can figure that out, that also clearly works to their advantage, because Democrats have Democrats figured that out several election cycles ago about how to maximize their vote early. And Republicans have specifically not done that. And a couple of times Trump has even said, I don't want you to vote early, right? I want you to vote on election day when you're supposed to vote or whatever. And if Republicans are finally figuring out, just get them to vote, right? They can vote in September if you can vote in September, October if you want to vote in October, or if you want to wait till election day, whenever, but just get out and vote. If they can figure that out, then they can also do that. And Republicans are also making, as we've seen a lot of this in the past week, but even before this, Republicans are also making inroads with younger people. That, because of my career, I find really interesting. that conservatism is maybe making a comeback on college campuses, at least in some ways, or certainly now it's in the past several days, it's much more accepted, okay, I think, on college campuses to say I'm right wing, I'm a conservative, whatever, than it has been for some time.
And Bug Okie asks what may be our last question here. Can you please give a quick update on the statewide races today?
I didn't see, well, Dwayne, maybe you can do that, because I didn't see the poll this morning. I don't know who put one out, or I didn't see it.
That was the CNU poll that came out 33 minutes ago, but I had a briefing on it earlier. It showed big leads for all the Democrats.
Double digit?
12 points for Spamberger, 11 for Hashmi, 7 for Jones. And Spamberger was over 50%.
Ooh, okay. That should make her campaign pretty happy today. Yeah, because the most recent one I'd seen was out of VCU, and they had Spamberger by 9, I think it was. We had Spamberger by 7, and that was because, although I think VCU also waited to the 2021 exit poll, but we had Spamberger by 7 because we waited to the 2021 exit poll. Before we did that waiting, her lead was larger, but that was because we had the sample that we got was a slightly Democratic sample. So when we waited to 2021, it was less Democratic. It was still Democratic, but it was less Democratic than what we actually had. And that makes a big difference too, again, in the waiting. But I think that, I think that's where we are today. That seems to be a general consensus, right? High single digits, low double digits. At one point in the Roanoke College poll, but this is before we were waiting to the exit poll, we had Spamberger by, it was like 16, 17, something really, really high. That at the time I thought was really, really high. And in case anybody ever wonders that, does he ever look at something and say, I'm not sure that's really right? The answer is, yeah. Sometimes I look at something and say, I don't know. But someone who worked with me back in 1994, Dwayne, and this is one that you probably don't know, I was really reluctant to release that survey, which I've never held one back. I have never not released one, not ever. I was really reluctant because I was thinking like, oh man, this is bad. This is bad. Not only do we got the wrong horse, and we are going to get beat up for having the wrong horse. And technically I was the director, but the person then, who's also a good friend, was working with me, just sat me down and gave me a lecture and looked at me and he said, what did we do wrong? Said, what did we do? Did we do this? Yes. Did we do that? Yes. Did we do what we were supposed to do? Yeah, we did. He said, then you release it. Why would you not release it? We did everything the way we were supposed to do it. Why would you not release it? Because you think it's not correct. Like, once again, sometimes I'm not nearly as smart as I think I am. But fortunately, he talked me into it. And again, another lesson learned. I'm capable of learning. A lesson learned. So it's like, I don't hold that stuff back, even if I've got questions about it. And occasionally I've had questions about stuff and wondered whatever. But if you do everything to the best of your ability and you think you did it right, you're kind of left with what else am I going to do? And again, substitute my judgment for something else. Like, I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
So.
Well, thank you. Luann, you want to have any closing words for us?
No, I just want to thank Harry. This has been really informative. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did. thank you all for coming. And if the recording worked, we'll send it out in the next reporter's notebook. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Oh,
for
and
having
if
me.
there's-
And thanks.
Yeah.
And thank all of you for showing up for this and participating. It is honestly, it is fun for me to talk about polling, and I'm happy to try to explain what we do. It's not magic, and again, and we do our best. Doesn't mean we're always right, but we do our best. We really do.
Thank you, Harry.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Bye.
All right. Thank you.